More than any other vessel, the tugboat captures the salty essence of a working-class ship. These rugged workhorses possess an endearing quality that has won them the affection of millions. Yet in the wheelhouse is a captain who requires more ship-handling skill than any master on the seas. And the power a tug harnesses can push a ship more than 100 times her own weight. From the classic harbor tug to the powerful river towboat, tugs move the cargo that fuels the global economy. They and their close cousins, the fireboats, are among the cornerstones of the maritime world. And fireboats have taken part in some of the most dramatic incidents that have ever occurred in any port. But the tugboat has also enjoyed days of glory. One of the most heroic was during the attack that hurled America into World War II. Yet even before these dramatic events, tugs had already changed the very nature of shipping. With their sturdy design and the hard-working dedication of their crews, they helped propel the merchant trade from an era of sail and wood into the age of steam and steel. Whether helping to dock a 65,000-ton ocean liner in New York Harbor, or pushing a 1,000-foot-long raft of barges on the Mississippi River, tugboats, in all their varied shapes and sizes, perform numerous invaluable jobs. It's an importance that is belied by the tug's basic simplicity. In essence, a tugboat is little more than a housing for an engine, one that must be light, yet extremely powerful. Large ships and barges traveling at low speeds are at the mercy of winds and currents in narrow inland waters. Tugs act as mobile, attachable propulsion units to wrestle these behemoths against a dock or push them safely to their destination. But moving a mountain of steel like the Queen Elizabeth II requires much more than brute force. It also calls for precise maneuvering in tight quarters. Applied with the skill of an experienced tugboat captain, it's the hardware inside a tug that gives it this unique combination of qualities.
Most important part of the tugboat is probably its machinery. The engine, the propeller, the rudder. You know, they're very highly maneuverable tugboats. They have big rudders, and they turn in a very tight radius.
The engines of a tugboat may generate anywhere from 800 horsepower for a small harbor tug to a formidable 22,000 horsepower for a large ocean-going model. But since it's designed to maximize its pushing power and maneuverability, a tugboat's high power does not necessarily translate into high speed. Tugs rarely run faster than a modest 13 knots. Of all the types of tugboats operating today, it's the burly little harbor tug that most closely captures the essence of these classic vessels. While they can perform several tasks, from pushing barges to towing ships in coastal areas, the main job of the harbor tug is to assist larger craft in maneuvering to and from their berths. A typical harbor tug weighs in the range of 100 to 500 tons and is anywhere from 50 to 140 feet in length. Its deckhouse covers about 2/3 of the deck, with sufficient space to accommodate living quarters for a crew of around 5 people. The wheelhouse is raised and designed to afford maximum visibility. The steel hull is deep and strongly built, and while it was designed with practical considerations in mind, some find its stubby appearance pleasing to the eye.
Hull design of tugs has always struck me as being very beautiful. Their hull is a relatively narrow, deep hull that keeps the prop buried and doesn't present a lot of resistance. Makes for a real nice hull form.
Although tugboats are essential to the operation of a modern port, they're a relatively recent addition to the maritime world. Seamen in the age of sail power had to find other ways to dock their ships.
In many cases, they had done it earlier with men in rowboats, pulling on lines from the bows and sterns. But as ships got larger and as the payloads got larger, this was simply not able to be done. They needed tugs, they needed towboats, they needed something that would enable them to maneuver.
By the early 1800s, steam power was being used with limited success on the water. One of the first commercial uses of steam, and the first ever tugboat, was the stern paddle wheeler Charlotte Dundas. She was built in Scotland on the River Clyde to replace horses as a means of towing on the Clyde and Forth Canal. Making her first voyage in March of 1803, she successfully towed 2 barges for 20 miles at a speed of 3 knots. However, this would also be her last voyage, as it was feared that the wash from her paddle wheel would erode the banks of the canal. But though the Charlotte Dundas was laid up to rot, the use of steam power in maritime applications was just beginning. In 1814, on the River Tyne near Newcastle, England, a boat called the Perseverance was launched. Designed to carry passengers, she featured a wooden hull, a steam engine, and 2 side-mounted paddle wheels. But in her first 4 years of operation, the Perseverance failed to earn a profit transporting people and was sold. However, her new owner had a novel idea on how to make money from his investment. For a small fee, he offered to tow a sailing ship out of the busy coal port to sea. When the captain of the larger ship agreed to this unusual proposal, it inaugurated a new age in shipping. The steam tugboat was born, and for the remainder of the century and beyond, Tyneside shipbuilders became one of the major suppliers of steam-powered tugboats to the world. During this period, the tugs built on the Tyne River changed very little. The tugboat Appleton Hall, now moored near the San Francisco Maritime Museum, was built in 1914. Yet she looks remarkably similar to the Perseverance and her sister tugs of 90 years before. Her hull is made of iron instead of wood like the first Tyne River tugs, and her engines reflect the only significant change that occurred in the era of paddle wheel tugs. The first Tyne River tugs had a single engine that drove both paddle wheels, making them cumbersome to handle. But by the middle of the century, they were outfitted with 2 engines which independently operated each paddle wheel. This development greatly enhanced their agility, allowing the tugs to turn within their own length by running one paddle wheel forward while reversing the other. Side paddle wheel tugboats were common well into the 1930s, with some, such as the Appleton Hall, working as late as the 1960s. Their longevity was owed to their remarkable maneuverability and the fact that their engines were simple and dependable, with large cast iron components that were designed to last.
They were not technologically advanced, but that's one reason why they did last so long. They were overbuilt, they were over-engineered. Everything was bigger, bigger was better, which is real common in steam engineering.
In the second half of the 19th century, the use of tugboats expanded to ports around the globe. Their advantages were many. They made docking vessels less subject to the vagaries of wind and tide, and so helped to regularize shipping schedules. They also made harbors accessible to larger and larger ships, spurring the construction of bigger, iron-hulled, steam-powered vessels, and giant sailing ships called windjammers, which replaced the clippers as the largest sail-driven craft in the world.
A typical cargo vessel of the 1830s would be maybe 300 tons. At the end of the sailing ship era, there were ships of 3,100 tons, so a tenfold increase in the size, and largely due to the availability of tugs.
Even as paddle wheel tugs were being deployed with great success around the world, a concept was developing that would make paddle wheels obsolete. As early as the 1840s, a Swedish inventor and naval architect named John Ericsson was experimenting with an invention that would revolutionize ship design in general and tug design in particular. It was called the screw propeller, and it pushed the water behind a ship in the same manner that an electric fan pushes air. By the 1850s, it was clear that the simpler and more efficient propeller was superior to the paddle wheel as a means of propelling ships. Yet paddle wheel tugs continued to be made, primarily by British shipbuilders.
The British continued to build paddle tugs as late as the teens with the Appleton Hall, and they were used in part because they were highly maneuverable, and in part because they were well suited to shallow situations and calm waters, and in part because they were just conservative people and didn't like to change. They didn't have to.
But though it came slowly at first, change was just over the horizon for the hard-working tugboat. By the late 1800s, the stern-mounted screw propeller had begun to replace the paddle wheel as a means of propulsion, and the tugboat, as it now appears, soon emerged. Just as the Tyne River paddle wheel tugs saw very little change in their century of use, modern tugboats resemble their 19th century propeller-driven ancestors to an astonishing degree. An 1880s advancement in steam technology known as the reciprocating steam engine, coupled with the screw propeller, brought a significant increase in horsepower to the tug. A Tyne River paddle wheel tug may have harnessed 60 horsepower, while a tug such as the Hercules, built in 1907, is rated at 1,000 horsepower.
This vessel here was a standard coastwise coal hauling tug. Most of them would tow 4 schooner barges. These schooner barges were long tows. The tow was a mile behind them, and these things were getting out of hand. They lost a lot of them, and a lot of these tugs were lost also. This one is very fortunate she survived.
But while steam-powered tugs like the Hercules were remarkably successful, they were not without their problems. Among other things, they needed a relatively large crew. Running a steam engine required at least 3 people in the engine room at all times: a fireman, an oiler, and an engineer. And to control the speed and engine direction, the captain in the pilot house had to use a cumbersome system of bell signals to communicate with the engineer in the engine room.
We still had these old engine order telegraphs on the steamboats where you had to ring the engineer and he'd turn it up like you wanted. And then if you've been running the boat slow, the boilers cool down, you have to wait a while to get full speed out of it as you build up steam.
For a tugboat, which required quick and precise changes in engine speed and direction to accomplish its job, these were significant drawbacks. Many of these problems were solved with the introduction of the more easily operated diesel engine in the early 1900s.
On a diesel boat, you control it. It's all right there at your hands, and the pilot has full control. He can go from full ahead to full astern really in just seconds.
Yet any tugboat man who has spent time on a steam-powered tug is left with fond memories.
Those old boats had a certain romance to them, you know. First thing, they were quiet. The old diesel boats are noisy, they bang and clatter and go on. The old steamboats are quiet and everything.
But eventually, nostalgia gave way to practical considerations. Not only were diesel engines easier to operate, they were much more efficient at producing horsepower for their weight. By the 1930s, diesel power had become the preferred means of propulsion, though it was not unusual to find a steam tug still in service in the 1950s.
After the Second World War, steam power was on its way out. boat by boat. It took 3 or 4 steam tugs to provide the same horsepower that one diesel tug would provide. You must have seen the pictures of New York Harbor with all those little steamboats pushing alongside the Queen Mary and the Normandy. You'd see 18 tugs on them. Today, those ships only use two big boats.
Today, the tugs that ply our waters are generally of 4 types: small harbor and utility tugs, large harbor and coastal tugs, ocean-going and salvage tugs, and river towboats. Each application demands certain design features that change the outward appearance of these vessels. A small utility tug may work only during the day with a limited crew, and therefore has little need for more than a pilot house to protect her crew from inclement weather. The requirements of a river tug, on the other hand, lend these vessels the appearance of a floating hotel, with their live-aboard crews, shallow draft, and massive power. More commonly called towboats, they navigate the western rivers of North America. The cargoes that travel this network bring the industrial and agricultural products from the interior of the United States to the markets of the world. And the main artery in this network is the mighty Mississippi River. Though seemingly tranquil, the Mississippi can be treacherous. Due to swift currents, unpredictable shoals, and the massive size of the groups of barges that make up their tows, it requires a particular type of expertise to pilot a river towboat.
These pilots out on these large tows do a remarkable job. When you consider many of these tows today are much larger in configuration than any ship in the world.
The largest towboats on the Ohio and Mississippi rivers develop 10,500 horsepower. They are capable of pushing as many as 40 barges with a cargo capacity equal to 4 times the average ocean freighter. The barges are lashed tightly together, 5 long and up to 3 wide, to make up a single unit that is often 1,000 feet in length. The towboat itself may exceed 200 feet. For a captain, steering a unit this size is an immense challenge.
You're 1,200 feet long and 240 feet wide. It does not go exactly where it's pointed. And you come down to a 600-foot wide bridge opening, and your tow is 240 feet wide, and the current is very swift.
In conditions like this, one false move can send the barges careening into a bridge span. Though occasionally less powerful than the large river towboats, ocean-going tugs generate upwards of 9,000 horsepower from their engine rooms, with some exceeding 22,000 horsepower. Ranging between 125 to 250 feet in length, they are small ships in themselves, but with the capacity to tow any ship or floating structure anywhere at any time. Whether it be the delivery of drilling platforms to the offshore oil fields or salvage and rescue missions, these mighty tugs command the greatest respect. Nevertheless, it's the feisty harbor tug that remains the classic image of the tugboat. Overbuilt for strength, with fenders all around, these stout vessels engage in an occupation where some damage is inevitable, giving them a rugged, working-class mystique. And yet to captain one of these vessels requires the utmost skill.
You can stand alongside a man and watch him handle the controls, and you think it's somewhat easy. And when you get the controls in your hands, you all of a sudden realize that there were a lot of things going through his mind that you never realized.
I've always thought that the tugboat captains were the premier ship handlers in the world today. These fellows not only have to be able to handle a tug, they have to know all the waters in the harbor in which they sail. And that's the same whether it's New York or Jacksonville or Miami or Beaumont, Texas.
A harbor tug captain may find himself engaged in a variety of towing operations in the course of a day. But perhaps more than any other type of tow, it is the job known as ship assist that is the most demanding. Helping a gigantic vessel like the Queen Elizabeth II in docking is a delicate and complex process. If anything goes wrong, both ship and tug can be seriously damaged. It's an assignment that requires the utmost from the captain and his tugboat. In assisting a ship in port, a tug captain takes part in something akin to an elaborate waterborne dance. In New York and many other ports, the first step in the process begins at sea. As a ship approaches port, a marine pilot is transported to the vessel aboard a small pilot boat. While still miles outside the protected waters of the port, the sea pilot climbs a rope and wood ladder called the Jacob's Ladder to board the ship and ascend to the bridge. This sea pilot is intimately familiar with the local waterways and is hired by the ship's company to guide the ship safely from deep open ocean into the confines of the port.
Marine pilots are amazing people. They climb aboard ships in the dark, in the daylight. They go up and they talk to captains who may be Croatian, Chinese, green, black, white. And they proceed about their job, which is advising the captain of the way into a particular port.
Once it is safely inside the port, the ship is approached by one or more tugboats. The tug captains cautiously move their boats up to the moving wall of steel, while the larger vessel is still underway. They respond to the orders of the ship's pilot through communication by two-way radio.
201 Wedgewater, Queen Elizabeth II. 012.
To a large extent, ships can maneuver on their own while underway in port. But when the waterway narrows and the ship slows, she may not be able to resist the effects of wind and current. The tugs assist in steering the larger vessel, and as the ship approaches the dock, they also help to slow her substantial momentum. To coordinate the maneuvering of the massive vessel into its berth, a docking pilot comes aboard. On the bridge, he relieves the sea pilot and begins docking procedures.
030.
It's a process that can cause anxiety for everyone involved, but it is still the ship's captain who ultimately bears the responsibility.
It's a funny thing. You stand next to this gentleman who climbs aboard your bridge, and 9 times out of 10 you can feel comfortable with him or not.
You have to put the captain at ease and in a very short order make sure that he feels that he's in competent hands, because he takes the responsibility even though the pilot has the controls.
One pilot that Captain Burton Hall of the Queen Elizabeth II has no doubts about is Captain Grover Sanchagrin of New York. Perhaps the most experienced docking pilot in the world, he has docked more than 40,000 ships in his career.
I figured you had to slow down sooner or later if you're going to go into slip and flood tide.
Yeah, well, try.
At this most critical point, the ship's captain relies on the docking pilot's intimate knowledge of the harbor and especially with his mastery of the tools of his trade, the tugboats.
All docking pilots are basic tugboat men. That's where we come from. We come from the ranks of tugboat captains. Because how can you orchestrate a tugboat show if you yourself are not a tugboat captain?
They make the best pilots. The best pilots in this bay were ex-tugboatmen and always will be. You can't learn it out of a book. It don't work that way because every job is different.
From the bridge wings, the docking pilot quickly assesses currents, tide, and wind conditions before setting his docking plan into motion. From this vantage point high above the water, he carefully coordinates the ship's own power with the position, angle, and pushing force of his tugs. The tug captains acknowledge his radio commands with their whistles, in a process that requires an extraordinary degree of teamwork and excellent communication. It all looks routine when choreographed by a master like Sam Chagrin.
There won't be another pilot like him. He's an immensely skilled person. When he docked this ship, he actually only used the engines once in the whole maneuver. He used the tugs, but he used the fact that it was slack water, and he used the momentum of the ship. But he just brought her alongside. No fuss, no bother.
I've always enjoyed the challenge, and the more difficult the job, the better I liked it. It's really constant learning. I've never stopped learning, and the day that I do, I want to be afraid.
The forces harnessed during ship assist work can be enormous. While secured to the ship by the tow bit, a tug can capsize if pulled by the ship's weight at the wrong angle. When the main towing line is under severe strain, a braking tow line can easily snap back and kill a deckhand.
You've got to know the limitations of what you can do, what the line can do, and when to get yourself out of the way. I hear a line grunting and groaning, and I step back.
Tugboating can be a rough and dangerous occupation. It's a danger that tugboat man Arthur Fournier knows only too well. The accident involved an empty tank barge. If sealed for long periods of time, the air inside a steel tank may be completely devoid of oxygen, posing a lethal trap. Captain Fournier's son, Billy, a skilled tugmaster in his own right, and a deckhand named Danny Govani, noticed a young man step inside a deadly tank barge.
He passed out. Billy saw him. Billy went down after him. Danny saw Billy. Danny went down after him. Danny and Billy died, and the kid who went in the tank woke up 4 days later and said, "Where am I? Where's my wife?" Nothing wrong with him. Amazing.
Sadly, the death or injury of a tugboat man is an all too common occurrence. But the dangers inherent in being on a tugboat are an unavoidable part of the job. Tugboats commonly find themselves near dockside hazards. For this reason, and because of the often combustible nature of cargoes that are carried by the ships a tug assists, most tugboats are equipped with auxiliary firefighting equipment. They are often the first line of defense during waterfront fires. But when dockside disasters occur, it is more often the close cousins of the tug known as the fireboat that answer the call. On February 9th, 1942, the French ocean liner Normandy caught fire at her New York dock. A phalanx of tugboats answered the call, eventually fighting the blaze to a standstill. But though tugboats were still a mainstay of fire protection in harbors well into the 20th century, as early as 1891, New York City had commissioned one of the first vessels specifically built as a fireboat. The New Yorker was 125 feet long and capable of pumping 16,000 gallons of water per minute. Since fireboats evolved from tugboats, they incorporate many of the same design principles. Both must be very maneuverable, and a fireboat, like a tug, is a housing for horsepower. But where a tug uses its power for propulsion, a fireboat uses it for pumping water. When the city of Los Angeles first annexed the port of San Pedro in 1909, its new harbor commissioners contracted the tugboats Warrior and Falcon to serve as the port's firefighters. But as the port grew, so did its need for specialized fire protection. In 1925, the city took delivery of the 99-foot-long fireboat, Los Angeles City No. 2, also known as the Ralph J. Scott. She was complete with the latest innovations in fireboat technology.
Fireboat number 2 is different than many fireboats in that its development in 1925 was well ahead of its time. It is designed for the Port of Los Angeles. It had a shallow draft so that it could work in areas where we had mud flats in those days. It's armed with a capacity that was commensurate with the type of hazards, not only of that day, but of those projected for the future of this port. And so even today, 70 years later, this fireboat is ample and more so to the challenges of this port.
She's powered by 7 engines, 3 of which drive her 3 propellers, and 4 engines power her pumps. Numerous upgrades over the years have given her a pumping capacity of 18,600 gallons of water per minute.
That's about the size of the average backyard swimming pool. If you consider that it might take all day long to fill that pool with a garden hose, this fireboat is capable of filling it in about 60 seconds.
In 1926, the No. 2 saw her first action when she battled a blaze aboard the fully loaded lumber schooner Sierra. But her most heroic moment came when she and her crew responded to the explosion of the petroleum tanker Marquet in 1947. The explosion shook the boathouse like an earthquake.
It blew parts of the ship all over the area, up to 3 miles from the site of the explosion, and was heard for many miles inland. And of course it did tremendous damage to the ship. There was nothing left but the bow and the stern. The whole center section of the ship had been eradicated by the explosion.
3 million gallons of flaming petroleum products fanned out across the harbor. Flames were blocking the channel. If they spread, they would threaten industrial and residential areas nearby. When Fireboat No. 2 arrived at the disaster, the heat and smoke seemed impenetrable. But the only way to prevent the spread of destruction was to get the No. 2 to the other side of the inferno and train her powerful water jets on the flaming liquid. With engines full ahead, the boat's pilot, Bill Gray, made a dash for the other side of the wall of fire. Miraculously, Gray and his men in the No. 2 emerged on the other side unharmed and were able to successfully contain the spread of the blaze and save the Port of Los Angeles from further destruction. The Ralph J. Scott would go on to serve for decades to come. Today, she's registered as a National Historic Landmark and still serves dutifully for the fire department in the Port of Los Angeles. Some 350 miles north of the Ralph J. Scott is the port of Oakland, California. Until 1993, that port used as its fireboat a surplus Navy tugboat leased to the city after World War II. Yet her most heroic days were long before, when she was a common yard tug named the Hoga, at a place called Pearl Harbor. In 1941, the Hoga was assigned to assist ships and perform general harbor duties at the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. In appearance, there was nothing extraordinary about the 100-foot tugboat. But on December 7th of that year, she would be called well beyond her normal duties. It was a Sunday, and the crew of the Hoga had the day off. Just before 8 in the morning, the sound of deafening explosions shattered the tranquil morning. Wave after wave of Japanese aircraft hurled bombs and torpedoes at the unsuspecting U.S. Pacific Fleet, half of which was moored in the harbor. For America, World War II had begun. Despite the fact that they lacked armament of any kind, the crew of the Hoga set out immediately into the raging battle with orders to assist ships in distress and pick up survivors. Hoga crew member Robert Mack MacArthur remembers seeing Japanese bombs score a direct hit on the battleship Arizona.
And suddenly the whole vessel seemed to rise up a little out of the water and then slump back down in again. And she settled very rapidly after that. She never rolled, she just settled straight down onto her bottom.
The explosion turned the Arizona into a flaming wreck. But the men of the Hoga continued to work throughout the chaos. All the while, the leadership of Tugmaster Joseph Nick McManus was tireless and unshakable.
Nick was a very stable man and a very nice guy, and he, as far as I'm concerned, was one of the real heroes at Pearl Harbor.
Meanwhile, the battleship Nevada was trying to get out of the harbor, but her attempt to escape only drew more Japanese attacks. Severely crippled, the Nevada was in danger of sinking and possibly blocking the entrance to Pearl Harbor. McManus steered the Hoga alongside and began pushing the crippled giant out of the channel.
My battle station was on the top of the pilot house, manning the fire hose, along with the ship's cook. There was a big hole in the bow of the Nevada, and we were up high enough on that fire hydrant that we could throw the stream directly into the hole.
As the Hoga's crewman directed her water cannon into the flames, the Hoga delivered one final push to solidly ground the Nevada in shallow water, clear of the navigable channel.
After we left the Nevada, we went back down to the Arizona and started fighting fire on the Arizona.
Finally, after more than 48 hours of continuous duty, the Hoga and her crew were relieved for a well-deserved rest. The actions of the Hoga and her crew proved that heroism comes in all shapes and sizes. The battleship Nevada was refloated and reconstructed to serve the remainder of the war, as were several other warships that were damaged or sunk. But of the over 100 vessels that were present that fiery day at Pearl Harbor, only the Hoga remains afloat and intact. Tugboats have worked the waters of the world for the better part of 2 centuries. The traditions surrounding the tugboat have developed into a unique culture, a culture complete with its own methods of communication.
Before the radios, simple thing like this, the old whistle, everybody had one. Maybe they had 1 or 2 in case they dropped it. No battery required.
He'd blow it a certain number of times. 1 was to come ahead, 1 was to stop, 2 was to go back.
And then you'd use the ship's whistle for the tugs on the stern.
Here, give it a little. Can I give it a little? Like that's how the tug answers, just like that.
A system of hand signals is also used to visually communicate commands.
This would be slow ahead into the ship. This would be half ahead. This is full speed. Bring her back to half. Full speed again. Stop her and then back her up. And then when he was done with the job, he would signify this ladder up. Bulletproof.
Like all cultures, tugboating is a way of life that often passes from generation to generation.
In the tugboat industry, especially the harbormen, a lot of them 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation. There's a lot of men who bring their sons into the business.
Brian is already captain on the escort. The other boys have got the pushy. They are soon to be 13 and 15.
To any way of life, technology brings about change. Tugboating is no exception. In the last 2 decades of the 20th century, the tugboat has undergone more changes than in all of the previous century. New ideas of how tugs can be used are gradually changing their profile. Many of the innovations in tugboat design revolve around the quest for ever-increasing power, efficiency, and maneuverability. For some time, it has been common to find tugs with controllable pitch propellers and what are called quart nozzles. The controllable pitch propeller allows the tug captain to adjust the angle of the blades of the propeller as needed for optimum thrust. A quart nozzle is a housing that surrounds the propeller and provides improved water flow over the propeller. This translates into more pulling power. But not everybody is happy about the changes occurring to tugboats.
Now we're going into a whole new phase of towboating, and it's very automated. I don't like it in a lot of ways because the crews are smaller. There's 3 men on a boat with 6 times the horsepower of this steam tug.
Nevertheless, the quest for more power and maneuverability continues, and tug builders are applying the latest in propulsion technology to a brand new generation of tugboat designs. Known as tractor tugs, these vessels have joystick controls which direct the tug in any direction, including sideways.
To put a tug into the maneuvers that they believe that these tractor tugs are able to do is asking a tug to commit an unnatural act. It just is not what a tug should be doing, to be laying out there on a 45-degree angle trying to stop a ship.
One of the propulsion systems that permits this unnatural behavior is known as a Z-drive.
It's like an outboard motor drive. The propeller itself swings 360 degrees around. It will give you all the power the tug has in any single direction. It's a big advancement, but you don't get any more for docking a ship with that tug as you get for any other tug.
Some tugs have no propeller at all. They have what is called a Voith-Schneider drive. Invented in the 1920s, the blades of the unit are mounted on a rotating drum and extend downward from the hull. As the drum slowly spins, the angle of the blades can be changed by the operator to achieve instantaneous and precise thrust in any direction. But although the technology of the modern tugboat has changed, its soul remains the same. The basic concept of a tugboat is as simple today as it ever was. It pushes and it pulls. And the heart of a tugmaster, deckhand, or engineer, more likely than not, still belongs to the traditional workhorse of the tugboat fleet, the classic harbor tug.
My favorite boat is this boat we're on here. I'll tell you why. She's 3,160 horsepower. She has 1 propeller. She has 1 engine. She has 1 rudder. Everything is singular, where the bigger boats are 2 of everything. She's a fine boat, and she's not expensive to run. You get big twin screw boats. You've not only got a large capital investment, but there's a lot to maintain them, and they suck the fuel up like crazy.
Yet the appeal of the tugboat transcends practical considerations.
There's something about tugboats that is essentially charming. It's a paradox. They are the fundamental workboat. Their only purpose is to do this kind of single-minded thing. A big engine directing power to push a bigger thing one place or another. And yet there's something about them which is always tinged with a kind of animation. They're more humane in a way. They're more like people.
It is exactly this personal quality which has allowed the tugboat to win an enduring place in the public imagination.